for the opportunity. Good afternoon, everybody. Happy Veterans Day. Everybody can hear me fine, I hope?
Yes.
We are going to end the day with a brief discussion of slips, trips, and falls. I know it's a popular topic. We talk about it an awful lot in the industry, and I address it across several industries. No one is doing well with it, if I can at least offer that. It's challenging no matter what industry you're in, especially for the healthcare industry. So I have a little presentation that kind of comprehensively looks at all the aspects you should be considering, and we'll open the floor up to questions in the end. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Just a brief introduction for myself. My name is Jonathan Poole, and I'm a contributor to a lot of Fortune 500 companies and their safety programs. I specialize in fall protection, lockout, tagout, confined space, and other OSHA topics. Please feel free to reach out to me at jpoole@ei1.com if you have any questions once the presentation is over and you've left. So slips, trips, and falls are like I said, a nuisance across the board. They are popular for OSHA. Fall protection is always the #1 most cited violation in their top 10s for as many years as I can remember. Statistics are all over the place. You will read some things that seem to contradict each other, so I keep them general when we talk about them. They are the most frequently reported workplace accident if you look at it in terms of days lost away from the workplace. Some things say 1 out of 4, some say 1 out of 3 of non-fatal workplace injuries where people miss work are the result of a slip, trip, or fall. We know that they are the second leading cause of accidental deaths in America, whether it be on the job or at home, and that's second only to traffic accidents for workers. They're ranked 3rd on the list of the most common types of personal injury lawsuits, right behind auto accidents and medical malpractice. This results in what we're looking at is at least, and of course it goes up, it may have gone off since I grabbed this stat, $17 billion to employers every single year. And that includes those falls that are legitimate and those that are not legitimate. It's a big industry. Basically, 1 out of 3 deaths in the workplace is in some way attributed to a fall. And when you look at all the falls that we see, at least 1 out of every 3 have to do with either a slip or a trip. So this is a big topic, and in the world of risk, it comes up over and over again. So definitely something we want to look at. And I want to start looking at it in terms of how we move around. Because it has more to consider with slips, trips, and falls than other things you might have considered before. The way our bodies balance it's a pretty complex system, to be quite honest. It runs multiple faculties simultaneously. We, of course, have our eyes that we're more familiar with, and our eyes determine the relationship of us to the world, obviously. And they also sense motion or changes around us. So we've got the visual cues coming in. Our body is a set of not only nerves, but muscles and tendons and joints. And through a very complex system, I won't explain today, of pressure and sensitivity, it determines how, on one side, the legs and the feet and our core are stabilizing ourselves. And then it also determines how our head is positioned in regard to our chest and shoulders, which direction we're pointing. And then, in addition to our body and our eyes, we have our vestibular system, which, again, I'm not going to go into anatomy. You do not want to hear me talk about that. I'm not knowledgeable enough. But our inner ear, we are all somewhat familiar with as being our key balancing system. There are little organs in that ear, and they're all about balancing and orientation so that they are always transmitting information about which direction our head is pointing and how that affects that. So you've got the inner ear, you've got your eyes, you've got your body, all sending all these signals simultaneously to your brain. And then your brain is, doing its millions of calculations a moment, and it's combining all that information it is receiving from the separate systems together with all of your life experiences and its memories of what this means and what you've seen this flight of stairs before. We know what stairs are. Our body knows how to react to them, et cetera, et cetera. So it is a balancing act of our body just standing there is amazing sometimes when you look into it. But the key is that if you distract any of these systems, it doesn't take distracting all of them. You can distract one of them, and you will have an effect on the ability of us to be mobile and navigate things. And so this has a lot to do with slips, trips, and falls. You don't have to do as much as you think you do. And it doesn't always have to be the surface that you are walking on that's going to affect you and lead to an accident. So we need to keep this in mind as I discuss this topic. We are all concerned with the surface and the surfaces we walk on, and we should be. That's not something we should dismiss, but we should also consider the other sources of information that are around us. These next two things I want to speak to is how if you wanted to make an accident happen, this is how easy it would be. Like I just said, you interfere with one of those four systems, and you've done a pretty good job of creating a scenario where an accident can happen. If you lose one of those systems, your body obviously tries to compensate, but all input sensory is not the same. Think of it in terms if you were in a dark room and you couldn't see where you were navigating, and you can imagine the way we reach our hands out or feel our toes, or we're feeling for anything because our body has basically given up on the sensory input, and it is thinking, okay, tactile, let's, we can't see, it's dark, let's go to another system to get that information. It will go to its memory of when you've been in that room last and it was illuminated. And so you're trying, well, I know if I'll take about 5 steps this way, I know there's a light switch in the back, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how this, and that's the best example I can give you of how this system works. But basically, any scenario like that where you change or affect one of the 4 systems where you get information are going to affect you. Dimly lit areas, and we know that lighting plays a lot to do with slips, trips, and falls. You've got to have good illumination in all these areas. So that's an obvious one, but think about sunlight entering a lobby through the windows in the late afternoon or at some point in the day where the sun comes up just right, and it's reflecting. Maybe you have some reflective glass or mirrors in that particular room or area of the lobby. It can cause problems for people. So just interrupting that, and there's another example, or stepping through a variety of surfaces and levels. Maybe you have a attractively landscaped path into the facility, but it's a series of different textures to your foot, different levels to navigate. It looks pretty, but unfortunately for people who have mobility issues, it's more of an obstacle course, and we have to think about that. In addition to just the surfaces and the sights, consider the fact that if you overload a person, we are all into marketing our facilities these days. It's always a good idea. Some of us have put signage up and to market or develop whatever business we can. Some of us have installed videos. A lot of television screens are out there that are giving all sorts of great marketing advice and what new offerings we have. But keep in mind that wonderful marketing is also a distractor for people. And if they are up there staring at something when they cross a threshold or going upstairs or downstairs, for example, or getting on an escalator, etc., you created a distraction. Obviously, you didn't mean to, but it does happen more and more in today's, inundate everybody with as much information as you can society. Also, what people bring with them can be can be very, very distracting to the systems. Something as simple as being stressed out, can lead too much oxygen, too little oxygen, hyperventilation, for example, that will affect your balance. And of course, going into a healthcare facility sometimes can be stressful and anxiety ridden for people that are there. So all of these things, and then obviously all the pre-existing conditions that come, I've just listed a few on the screen there, including the medications that accompany them. All of that can drastically affect mobility when you're trying to navigate through an area. So consider all these things are at play that can result in accidents, including what surface they're walking on. In addition to, this is one way by disturbing the systems. The other way you can engineer an accident is by obviously introducing circumstances to typically the surface that you're walking on that you or the individual cannot readily account for. I like to talk about anticipatory skills as something that some of us are very good at, like a foreign language. Some of us can pick up a foreign language very easily, and some of us study it for weeks and months, and we still have the same 25, 30 words that we remember, and that's it. But you have to understand anticipatory skills are not equal for everyone. Some of us think about what's in front of them and what's coming up next and are careful, while others throw caution to the wind and they navigate walking and going through a building, even one they've never been in, cavalier-like, without really considering that. We understand that they are going to happen, slips, trips, and falls. We know because we've all fallen before, we've all tripped over something before, we've all slipped. We know they are a possibility, but in so many instances, we are in the moment where it's actually happened. And at that point, it is very, very difficult for those four systems I've already communicated to you that perceive the scenario. It's very hard for them to react appropriately. Consider the fact that if you were walking along at a nice clip and you came across and you just realized I'm on water, I'm in a liquid of some sort, the natural reaction from our body is to freeze, and that is an overreaction that often leads itself to the actual slipping itself, because you're moving at one pace, you throw on the brakes, and you know what's going to happen if you don't have any traction. You do that with your body. So we contribute to these as much as anybody by the way we react, because we simply we know they could happen, but we don't really take them that seriously, and we all are guilty of that. We're great with visible hazards. And me as a safety consultant, if it's sharp or on fire, I feel very good about people when I talk to them about it. They get it. But as we've experienced, all of us experienced through the pandemic, when you cannot physically see the hazard, if the COVID virus was big enough and they were floating around in front of our eyes, I think this would probably go a little bit differently. But because it's so tiny, we can dismiss it. We can forget it and neglect it. And unfortunately, a lot of the sources for slips, trips, and falls are like that. Now, we know that the best way to approach them is by inspections and constantly keeping our walking and working surfaces clean and obstacle-free. And we can do that, no doubt about that. But usually it's unique situations. Something is leaked, something got spilled, something was left somewhere it shouldn't have been left. And it's hard to always remind people to look for that when they've traveled the same areas over and over. So let's keep that in mind as we do this. It is difficult. It's a difficult challenge that we have. The hazards are often transparent. They're liquids. They don't always show up very well that you're going to slip on. We live in a society where everyone's got to be somewhere and they should have been there 10 minutes ago, especially in healthcare industry. There's a lot of professionals there that need to get where they need to get. I know that from my more recent visits to hospitals. The nurses are always on the move and doing what they need to do. There's always equipment being moved around. That is just the nature of many of these facilities, and it lends itself to accidents. In addition, you can't really describe an area that is cleaned more often than healthcare, and sometimes even those cleaning activities alone lend themselves to slips, trips, and falls. And so it's just a awful combination of a lot of contributing factors that lead to this. All of these are the factors that I like to when I address slips, trips, and falls, I have everyone look at these four because they are core. You always have the environmental factors, and from the weather to the surfaces, the types of materials that have been used to construct your facility, to the sights and sounds, and and when you get out of the environment, you go straight into the activities. What do you do there? What are the processes and what happens at your facility? And again, in healthcare, lots of things happening quickly sometimes. And that includes the maintenance activities and the inevitable new construction that seems to be going on constantly. In addition to the processes and activities, you've got all the equipment and materials required by your facility to produce those results. And in the case of healthcare, obviously, there's a lot of them on wheels, including some of the patients, and they're being moved around like all the equipment is. And that's just an awful lot to compensate for. But the one I believe that you control less than the first three is the fourth one, the people themselves. And that's the truth, no matter what type of industry you're in and what facility you have. People remain the unknown factor. You add them to the environment and the activities and the equipment that are there, and you've just got a lot going on. Like I said, you've got the brisk walkers. When I find myself in healthcare, I see the brisk walkers that are the professionals who need to get where they need to get and do what they need to do. You've got the slow ones, whether it be because of a disability or a health condition, or that they're older, which frequent obviously lots of healthcare facilities, or the people that are in the facility for the first time and have no idea where they're supposed to go or how to get there. They're walking at a different click. And then you've got all the contractors and the construction going on, moving equipment through areas. And then, of course, you've got everything on wheels, the wheelchairs, the carts, et cetera, et cetera. So all of that is combined into this jambalaya of activity. And yeah, the surfaces mean a lot to that scenario, and you've got to make sure that you know what you're doing. But people and the variety of what they bring with them to the facilities are the one factor that your control over is never going to be as significant as what you wish. You can require your staff to wear appropriate footwear, and that is one of the chief ways to solve a lot of slips, trips, and fall risk is to address it with footwear. But again, you're not going to be able to do that for everyone that visits the facility. And that's going to be something that's, you have to navigate. In addition, children will visit the facilities, older people will visit facilities. Remember that mobility is like a bell curve, like many things. You have reduced mobility as a child and as you get older, and so somewhere in the middle of your life is going to be as good as you can move, and it takes a while to adjust to that. You have people that are there for a variety of reasons, and their reasons are going to affect their pace at which they go through the facility. It's going to affect their attitudes. It's going to affect how in tune they are to how they're navigating through the walking and working surfaces. Some are distracted. They're busy at work, doing construction in your facility, or they're there to visit someone and they are concerned, or they're late for an appointment, et cetera, et cetera. They move at the pace that serves them, and that's not always the pace that you would prefer them to move at, and they're wearing footwear that is sometimes not what you would prefer for them to wear. In addition to that, the pace that we're setting for ourselves in the world these days. We also have an unwillingness to be accountable for our own actions. We've seen so many examples of that lately, and unfortunately, that affects someone that takes a spill or has an accident or doesn't really know why they fell down. They were standing up and now they're on the floor, and they look for others to pay for their mistakes. And so that is a challenge that you are confronting. And so taking slips, trips, and falls, which are kind of a mundane topic sometimes, and taking them seriously is something that we all have to do. I compare it to going to the beach. You know, when we think of our safety records in our healthcare facilities, you know, like going to the beach, you want to focus on the shark attacks, you know what I mean? Because that is dramatic and exciting, and no one would like to have that experience. But when you look at the data, it's not the shark attacks that get you, it's the riptides. It's something that is not as exciting as what we would like to say, you know, whatever movie we've seen or television show that is blown out of proportion. It is the mundane things like how are the surfaces in your facilities. Those are what really are going to affect the risk that is there. So keep that in mind. It's not always the exciting stuff. Slips, trips, and falls, I'll go ahead and define them. You've probably seen these before, but let's talk about them. Slips are simply because you don't have any friction between your feet and the floor or whatever walking surface you have. You got to have friction. If the two don't have any kind of traction or friction between them, people slip. That is why liquids are what contribute to it so much. With trips, you are moving, your foot gets stopped somehow. Usually it hits something, and while your foot stays back, rest of you keep going, and that's going to result in a loss of balance in most scenarios. And then obviously a fall is when you lose your balance or somehow lose support, and you get to going in the down direction, usually quickly and out of control. Sometimes it is from a high level to a lower level, but I remind you that the majority of injuries in America in the workplace, it is not more injuries occur from falls to the same level than they do from falls from higher levels. So simply falling from the walking surface you're on or working surface you're on, that is typical. That is more typical than falling 2 or 3, 4 floors, whatever. The results are not the same, but you can fall from anywhere. Is my point. Let's talk about slips real quick. I'm not going to get into the science of them. Again, I want to do a comprehensive general presentation today. We gauge your surface by the coefficient of friction. We can bring out measuring tools to do that. But basically, your coefficient of friction is how much horizontal force is required to move something on a surface based on its weight or the vertical force it exerts on the floor. So what does it take to push something across the floor? That's your coefficient of friction. If it's static COF, it's how much effort you have to get something moving when it's standing there still. And if it's dynamic COF, it's once it's moving, how much effort is required to keep it moving on a surface. And we measure COF in 0 to 1, basically. The closer you get to 1, the more friction you have. And so typically in the world of slips, trips, and falls, that's what you want. And I've given some examples there. A recently swept sidewalk is a 0.8, and that's what you want. Something closer to 1 that is going to have good traction. Even linoleum, if it's in good shape, is above that 0.5, because that's where we gauge it. If you're above greater than 0.5, we consider that a safe COF on a walking working surface. If you're below 0.5, say a sidewalk covered in ice, then obviously you do not have enough friction to be safe. So that is our goal, is to make sure we have traction. I think we all can agree with that. All of these elements impact surfaces. Judging from what you pick originally, which some of you have little to no control over, I appreciate, but when you can, try to remind them that that friction is necessary. And so what materials are used? Sometimes you got what you got, and you're going to be working with it. But also the way its pattern or finish is put in. Sometimes we have to add texture to working surfaces because they don't have enough anymore. It's been worn over the years, and just giving some texture to it is enough to create better traction. There's also what condition you've kept it at. Slope obviously is going to have something to do with it. And then you've got all the environmental conditions, which is typically what contaminates that surface, what gets brought in, what is spilled on it, what is not swept up or maintained on it. And then, of course, you've got the force. So when we talk about force applied, basically that's the pace or the speed at which someone walks across the surface. The harder you run or the harder your stride is, the more force and the more you're going to scoot across that particular surface. So all of these things have to be considered when you do inspections. You need to look at that and you need to identify the areas. If you have an area where people are commonly having accidents, I think it goes without saying that you've got something, maybe one of these items here, that needs to be addressed. And I know of many facilities that either they apply some kind of coating to the surface to improve the friction, the COF on that, or they just take up whatever surface they put down and say, look, this just wasn't the right one. We made a mistake, and we're going to go with something that is superior. How do we address slips? How do we prevent them? Well, when you do your inspections, this is what you're looking for. Okay, you want to make sure that the main primary goals are maintain surface resistance. Okay, and if you cannot always do that, then you need to communicate the hazards. Obviously, one is preferable to communicating hazards, but we can't address everything the moment it happens. So we talk about making sure that the original surfaces we install are appropriate and that they are installed appropriately. That is number one. And then the maintaining of those surfaces throughout their lifetime is appropriate. And that's a lot of what your jobs are, and I appreciate that. Also, where you can establish behaviors, at least with your staff, you can address footwear considerations. And that is the number one that you can address in terms of slip, trips, and falls is what everybody is wearing. When you have that ability to have expectations, then you should make it, but you're not going to control that for visitors, etc. Limit those distractions. We talked about the marketing, video, signage, music, lots of ways. Some of the way we decorate is distracting. It may be, you may have a very polished lobby or a polished part of your facility, but the amount of information a person takes in has a limit, especially when they're trying to navigate an area they are not familiar with, especially coming off stairs, I mentioned it before, etc. Anything that can move beneath the feet needs to be eliminated. I hope you have learned that over the years. I know sometimes rugs or at least something to absorb moisture is necessary, and you need to be very careful with your selection there. Obviously, once things are introduced, dust, debris, etc. there, you need to address it as soon as you can, which means the housekeeping rounds. In my opinion, it goes to everyone on staff recognizing when there are contaminants on the floor and everybody having the mentality that that is not one particular person's job. That is all of our jobs to pick up litter, pick up anything that could be slipped on. We need to address it. And if I can't get to it because I'm responding to another responsibility, I can have easy access to something that I can place down that warns people of it, and I can alert somehow someone immediately that they need to address it if I cannot do it myself. If you have to have items that you need to put on the floor, they need to be secured appropriately, and it goes without saying. They do not need to have any movement to them whatsoever. And obviously, when surfaces are compromised from spills and accidents, then they need to be communicated, and you need to have a system of who knows or who's on call to address those incidents immediately or as fast as possible. Obviously, noting the issues and addressing areas that seem to have accidents over and over and over, those are incredibly important. When you know you have an area, say the doorways after a weather event where people are coming in with wet shoes or coming in with umbrellas, how are you addressing that? Have you got a system in place? And how is it doing? Because obviously that is an area where accidents can easily occur. So all of those things are elements. When you look at a slip, you just got to maintain that surface resistance. And when you can't, you've got to have a system in place to communicate the hazard. With trips, we've already talked about, that's when you're moving, something stops your foot, and you keep going. Again, it doesn't take a genius to know that these items up on the screen are typically the culprit. In addition to the finish for the surface for slips, you want to look at how it's been laid. Is it even? Is it stable? Transitions are by far that area where lots of trips and falls occur. Doorways, onto stairs, off of different levels, things that do not line up for you. And then you've got everything that we introduce, both the obstacles, which are unintentional, someone left something somewhere they shouldn't have, and the obstructions that are intentional because we're doing construction inside our facilities so frequently. How are we handling both obstacles and obstructions? At least one you can plan for. There is all sorts of mobility issues attached to the people who visit our areas, their lack of coordination. You want to make sure that your facilities consider who the visitors are and are built and designed in such a way that they acknowledge the limitations of the people that are walking through them. In addition, we know illumination. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that because I think that's probably been presented to you before, but definitely there should be no time between when a light bulb goes out and needs to be replaced and the amount of time it takes to get that. And you think of inside all the time, but all of this is magnified outside, given the fact that a lot of facilities are 24-hour, or people are going to be there after dark or before the sun comes up. You want to make sure that illumination is always addressed when there's a weakness. And then again, we like to landscape. We like to have modern architecture. We like to install signage and all sorts of things out there in the parking areas. And these obstructed views are a problem. Obstructed views are an issue when you're carrying things. You don't have, it may not be a stationary object. It may be what you bring with you. Some people like to stack it, and you've got to get this downstairs, and so you take more items than you should. And that is something you can communicate to your staff, that it's better to take multiple trips where you can see what's in front of you than obstructing your view with a piece of equipment when you can. And some of these pieces of equipment are so large that is very, very difficult. I appreciate that. But all of that should be at least considered how you transport items around and make sure that you can see. I always recommend that before you take pieces of equipment that are too large to break down into smaller, more additional trips. If you can't do that, then you need to walk the path of what you're going to be doing to look for any obstructions before you do that. Trips, basically what you want to look at is you want to make sure that you are going to deal with all walking working surfaces and make sure they are stable and level and well illuminated, obviously. But also the second part of that is addressing those obstacles and obstructions that we talked about, and that's both inside and outside your facility. Lighting I want to address, but we mentioned that enough. Ensure that the surfaces were installed correctly and they're maintained. We've mentioned that. And make sure you know the limitation of your visitors and your staff. And obviously, disabilities on staff are something you need to be aware of and to accommodate. But make sure that everything that you can do to assist everyone who's going to be in your facility with safety details like handrails, ramps, etc. Make sure they are maintained, they are installed properly, and that they serve the people who are going to be in it appropriately. When you can establish expectations for your staff, obviously you should do that, and make your effort to also establish behavior expectations for visitors, that whether it be signs that say slow and give a reason why they should be slow in that area, or if you know there's transitions from area to area that seem problematic, especially for those with disabilities or mobility issues, then signage can play a role, or just light or maybe even illuminated strips or paint, anything that can call attention to something that you know has given people difficulty in the past. For your staff, whenever they're going to do any kind of work, whether it be contractors or your own staff, make sure that you have standards for how those processes are going to be conducted. Extension cords, are they going to be stretched across areas where we know it's going to be problematic? Is there a better way of doing it? Then you need to have SOPs or procedures for what's going to be involved whenever someone stretches an extension cord or is going to be putting up whatever kind of equipment they need, ladders, etc., to access an area to do work. How are we going to set a barrier up? How are we going to address those hazards that we create? And then what the expectations are once that work is done, what the area should look like. Have someone go through that area to make sure that every bit of the debris was accounted for, nothing was left on the ground, nothing was left that could be tripped over, nothing was leaked or spilled that wasn't gotten up, et cetera, et cetera. There needs to be standard operating procedures for how to do a lot of that, and there needs to be accountability both to your team and the contractors that come on and do it. And if you're not willing to not only put those standards in place, but enforce them, then you're going to end up with accidents that occur because of debris or materials or items that were left that were not put away appropriately. Consider redesigning spaces that consistently prove that they are not appropriate for your facility. Again, it may just be that you have more than one or two accidents and you realize it's something about this area, depth perception, the lighting. You can try to address visibility first, but it may just be there is something a little bit odd about that transition area. It does not take a lot of difference in the distance your foot travels. Like in stairs, it's been proven you can raise a step about a quarter to half of an inch, and it's enough that the body adapts to what the space should be between stairs. And if it's off just a little, it will not do well with it. Because we somehow have that muscle memory that we know how far our legs should be picked up when we are navigating something like stairs. Falls, last one, and these are the ones that get most people, have a lot to do with age. They have a lot to do with your gender. More males die from falls, but more women have them typically. I would attribute that probably to footwear. And again, what you do is going to contribute to it. Whatever condition you have, is going to contribute to the tendency for you to fall. Obviously, any kind of side effects from medication or substance abuse. And then there's the environmental conditions. Now, when we speak to the environmental conditions, keep in mind that when we look what contributes to most falls, human factors are more typically than the environmental conditions. And you're not going to control the human factors as well as you're going to control the environmental conditions. So keep it in mind that the deck stacked against you from the very beginning. So when you have to put your resources to what you're going to address, try to put in safety policy that contributes the employees that you have to wear the right footwear and to conduct themselves appropriately when they are working and walking in the facilities. You can control things for you put signage in. You can do positive reinforcement for the correct behavior, tell people to slow down. The way you can educate visitors on areas that are awkward, and you can limit those behaviors that are more risk-taking. With the environmental conditions, you can keep things clean and keep things orderly. That is the extent of what we do, and that does work. These are the areas where falls occur. You'll notice that they are areas of transition. Some areas of heights, no doubt about that. But some of the same problems we saw with slips and trips. I won't speak to a lot of ladder safety today, but obviously we have ladder protocols. They should be inspected, and I will go so far to say not only ladders but step stools as well. They need to be inspected between every use. They need to be used for the way they are supposed to be used. They need to, people should be trained on their proper use. And again, we have basic standards for climbing them, facing them, 3 points of contact, 2 feet in a hand or 2 hands and a foot must remain on a ladder. Don't carry loads up with you. It definitely affects your balance, and you need to be careful in doing that. But I'm not going to dwell on ladders. We all know that is a source of a lot of falls. When you approach these falls, I encourage you to scrutinize your transitional areas and your stairs. That's where the majority of these accidents happen. And when you can't always architecturally change what you've got, consider communicating it to someone who's traveling in that area so that they can take the moment and say, okay, they're warning me of something here. Not everybody will pay attention to it. Some people will. When you are doing something that requires fall protection on site, make sure all devices are being inspected properly, and make sure that the individuals that are conducting that activity are trained on the equipment they're using. And if they need to wear their fall protection equipment, make sure they're trained on the proper use of that. They need to not only take care of it, keep it clean, but use it safely. I always like to say we can take the time to train employees to look ahead and scout out the areas that they're going to prior to going in those areas and doing work. You also want to think about the traffic patterns. You can take the time to study those and address those problems that you have in those areas where people seem to hesitate. You can also talk to people, encourage them to do input surveys of what they enjoyed about visiting your facility. Were there anywhere they felt awkward or difficult? And again, you can address those human behaviors with footwear requirements, et cetera, for your staff. Always have what you're going to do in case you do have an accident. We're not going to speak about that as much in this presentation, but always have a rescue or response plan in place and make sure you know what you would do when those accidents happen that you try to avoid. Inspections are the key. Make sure that you are conducting them regularly. Make sure that different people are conducting them. We all have different perspectives, and it goes to everybody looking at the same thing the same way is not going to pay you dividends. You need different people looking at different times of day. That means before the sun comes up and after the sun goes down. You need to be outside looking at those areas repeatedly and making sure that you're identifying the problems, whether it be lighting or the way something is set up, or ways can be improved, but you're going to have to walk and you're going to have to depend on others other than yourself to walk the same areas to make sure that that you can do that. I remind you that areas fill up quickly. It's like that drawer in your kitchen that holds all your attachments that are not spoons, knives, and forks, the gadget drawer. You accumulate so many of them, eventually they don't fit in the drawer and you can't shut it. Same thing happens in most storage areas. They wear out the welcome, you get too much stuff in them, and then they're awkward to navigate, things spill over, and that's when you have obstacles in those areas. So storage, I know we can't buy enough of it in America, but storage is the key. So look at storage when you consider what we can do differently. Make sure that when you look at these surfaces, you're keeping them clean and orderly, and the things that are up. Consider egress constantly, especially with your exits and how to get out of these areas. Make sure that your hazards are contaminant free, and if they do have contaminants, that there's a way to identify them and address them immediately. And obviously keep all of your fall protection equipment when you use your equipment in good shape, and make sure everybody's trained to use it correctly. If they're not trained correctly, then you need to retrain them and make sure they get what they need. But if you don't respond to the inspections, whether you have a form or not is up to you. But if you do not in some way make people accountable, find out where leaks came from, find out where spills originated from, Find out how many people walk by that object without addressing it. You want to create a culture in which everybody believes something like the walking and working surfaces are all important to them, and that everyone should be responsible for picking up items or addressing spills, or at least alerting somebody to their existence before something happens. So tough thing to get around. Lots of information there. Does anybody have any particular question that they'd like me to address?
Anybody?
How about in regards to chairs, rolling stools?
Okay.
That's the main thing that we see. Not gonna lie, it's a pain in our butts, but it happens quite frequently in a hospital setting.
Definitely. Anything on wheels is not your friend. And a stool combines the potential for please stand on me, or with wheels. It's not good. The advice I've given out in the past has been, I know that they are something that are going to be there, but when you can take them out of the thoroughfare, move them to an area, put them up when they're not being used, that is your best approach, because you're not, especially if children are around, good luck with that one. You're just not going to be able to stop that. That's just kid behavior. They love a stool. Who doesn't? But when they're not being used, they need to be returned under a desk, returned to the corner, returned in the area where they do as little damage as they possibly can. That's all I can offer you on that one. Sorry.
Problem is, it's when they're using it.
Yeah, well, that too, that they stand up and they don't realize it's rolled a couple inches, and you're right. People don't realize that one of the leading causes of injury and lots of falls are, broken wrists, because we go to sit down on something, throw our hands behind us when we realize we didn't hit it. And that's when we break our wrists so commonly. But, we would like to be able to get rid of that and have something that didn't have the wheels. But, again, that addresses another issue. When we can produce a stool that stays where it's supposed to stay on these surfaces, we'll have an invention there that's a money maker.
Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.